Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories this hour. 6 months of fighting in Gaza. Protests intensify, calling for a ceasefire and hostage deal, as the Israeli military says it's withdrawing some of its troops from the south. More than 33,000 Palestinians have been killed since October the 7th, including nearly 14,000 children in an arena of death, destruction and hunger. China's Premier Li Qiang cautions the United States over turning trade issues into security headaches as Washington's Treasury Secretary visits Beijing. And on World Health Day, we look at why one Eastern European country is seeing a mass exodus of its doctors. The conflict between Israel and the Palestinian armed group Hamas has now raged for half a year. Hundreds of thousands of protesters have joined rallies in Israel 6 months to the day since the October 7th attacks by Hamas. They're pressuring the government to pause hostilities and secure the release of hostages. The Israeli military announced earlier that it had now withdrawn most of its ground troops from southern Gaza. This comes as Egypt prepares to host a new round of talks aimed at reaching a ceasefire. Let's talk now to our correspondent, Alex Cadier, who's in the southern Israeli city of Sderot. Alex, what more do we know about this withdrawal of troops, and will it have an impact on ceasefire talks?
Well, it's certainly a significant withdrawal of troops because they're only leaving one brigade in Gaza. That's about 4,000 men. They will be manning a line a few kilometers that way, separating southern Gaza and northern Gaza, preventing civilians and Palestinians from returning to the north of the Gaza Strip, which is directly behind me. Now, the sense from American officials, U.S. officials, saying that this is not a particularly significant shift in the war. It's just rest and recovery for those Israeli troops. And that checks in, or at least makes sense with what Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, which is that the Israeli forces will go into the southern city of Rafah, which will require a much larger number of troops as well. So clearly a shift, a temporary shift, not necessarily going to affect those ceasefire talks. We know in the last few hours, the War Cabinet, the Israeli War Cabinet, approving a broader negotiation mandate for those Israeli negotiators heading to Cairo, giving them a bit more room to maneuver when it comes to striking a deal. One of the crucial sticking points in a deal for a ceasefire is the return of civilians to northern Gaza, which you may be able to see in the distance behind me. Now, the Israelis say they can be flexible on this, but anybody heading back into northern Gaza will need to be checked by Israeli security services. That's something Hamas has been pushing back against. All the key decision makers, the head of Shin Bet, the security agency, the head of the Mossad, David Barnea, will be there, as well as the deputy leader of Hamas. So clearly those talks will be happening in Cairo, but we'll have to wait a few days to see exactly what the result will be, Paul.
Alex, Iran has issued a new threat against Israel. What did it say, and how seriously could this escalate?
Well, Iran's saying that absolutely no Israeli embassy anywhere is safe, and clearly that adding to the fears of retaliation. It's not a question of if there will be retaliation for that strike, which killed several Iranian generals in Damascus, but not a question of if, but a question of when. And that is a sense you get speaking to Israelis. They expect a retaliation from Iran and from its proxies, Hezbollah. We heard Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, saying it was definitely going to happen. Now, intelligence agencies in the US saying to other news outlets that a swarm of explosive drones could be used to try and overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome defense system. Those are the kind of warnings that we're hearing here, which is really concerning for Israelis, as they expect that retaliation to come either here in Israel against US assets or in the region, or, as we've heard from that latest threat from Iran, against Israeli diplomatic postings in the region as well, Paul.
Alex, thanks so much for that. Alex Cadier reporting there from Sderot in southern Israel. And CGTN's Akram Al-Satri is in Gaza. I asked him how the 6-month anniversary of the conflict is being marked there.
Gazans have just now been able to go to some of their homes to some places, to some facilities, and to check the devastation that has been caused into them after the Israeli brigades redeployed from inside Gaza to the nearby areas. Thousands of Gazans have been leaving the Rafah area, going to Khan Yunis, Gaza central area, checking their homes and assessing the devastation that has been caused. So they are celebrating the anniversary by understanding the extent of devastation that has been caused to their lives and to their homes, and by trying to find their dears who are still buried under the rubble of the homes that were destroyed. So their misery is continuous, their suffering is continuous, the devastation is continuous, and the deprivation is also continuous. Yesterday, around 63 Palestinians were killed, and today the Palestinians are just enjoying those moments of calm and comfort and trying to use them for the sake of assessing how devastating their life became and how helpless, hopeless, and displaced they are still.
And we were just hearing, Akram, about Israel saying that it now only has one brigade left in southern Gaza. Is there any evidence of this on the ground there?
I have just come back from Khan Yunis. I was seeing the situation on the ground. Indeed, the Israeli troops have withdrawn from whole Khan Yunis area. People in the very east of Khan Yunis, people in the very west of Khan Yunis, people in the very north and south of Khan Yunis are now heading to their places, assessing their homes, trying to identify, as I have just told you, the extent of the damage that has been caused to them. People also in the central Gaza are coming back to their homes. Some of them are coming back to grab some of the luggage that is left and come back to Rafah because they are still afraid that Israel would be maneuvering and would be coming at some certain time to Khan Yunis or Gaza central area. But the facts on the ground, the extent of the withdrawal and the deployment are indicative of the fact that Israel left the southern Gaza Strip and that there is no military presence whatsoever in the hearts of the different cities, but by the border area. And it looks like Israel kept one brigade, the brigade that is in charge of separating Gaza, now north and Gaza City from Gaza south. The only area that the Israeli forces are present in is the area between the very east of Gaza from Netzarim area up to the very west of Gaza City in the Al-Rashid Street and the sea coast.
Akram al-Sashri reporting from Rafah. Well, 6 months into the conflict, at least 33,175 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza. That's according to the region's health ministry, which is run by Hamas. Thousands more are missing under the rubble of collapsed buildings. More than 1.7 million Palestinians, that's 3/4 of Gaza's population, are displaced. The majority are crammed into the southern district of Rafah, where we were just hearing from Akram, and living in tents and makeshift shelters. Across the enclave, there are critical shortages of food and medical supplies. The UN says 1.1 million people are facing catastrophic hunger. It's worse in the north, where at least 27 people, including 23 children, have died of starvation or dehydration. At least 60% of all homes in Gaza have been destroyed, along with 392 education facilities and most of the region's hospitals. Israel says more than 250 hostages were taken in the Hamas attack on October the 7th, and more than 1,100 people were killed. More than 600 Israelis have also died in combat. During a pause in fighting in November, 112 hostages were freed in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. The exact number of hostages still alive in Gaza is unknown. Mustafa Boghouti is the Secretary-General of the co-founder of the Palestinian National Initiative. I asked him for his thoughts on the ceasefire talks in Cairo.
I think we have better opportunity now to reach an agreement, simply because everybody realizes now the scope of the atrocity of the Israeli attack on Gaza. And because also there is a huge pressure on Netanyahu from inside Israel itself, from the families of prisoners. People realize now that his aim is to kill the prisoners. He doesn't care about them. And there is a huge rift now between Israel and the United States. But the most important thing is that Netanyahu failed to achieve his goals. He could not destroy the resistance. He could not impose his military control of Gaza. He failed in conducting the ethnic cleansing, which was his main aim. So we do hope that there is a very good chance for progress now. The Palestinian side have made lots of concessions to make this agreement happen. The most important thing now is to have ceasefire to stop the cruel genocide that is taking place in Gaza.
And you mentioned the intense domestic pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel. How do you think public opinion about his handling of the conflict has affected and changed the dynamics of the negotiations this time?
Very huge effect from people's resistance. I think the world community, the people of the world, have stood up and are supporting Palestinians now at large. And I think this public pressure has been very effective in changing many European government policies. This has been very effective in changing the American policy. And this pressure continues. Now, Biden now knows that he could lose elections if he continues to support Israel in its aggressive war.
And how has the discovery of the body of the Israeli hostage Elad Katzir changed how the issue of the hostages is being faced?
It has made it clear that with the continuation of the Israeli attack, all the remaining 130 Israeli prisoners will be killed by Israeli bombardment. So people now realize that to save the lives of prisoners, Israel must stop this war, must stop its attack, and go into negotiations to have exchange of prisoners so that all Israelis can come back home and Palestinian prisoners would be released.
And what is Hamas seeking from the upcoming round of talks in Cairo? And what if Israel refuses to attend?
If it refuses to attend, it will subject itself to huge pressure worldwide and the huge pressure from inside Israel itself. What Hamas declared is very clear. They want immediate ceasefire. They want supplies of humanitarian aid to the people who are now besieged in the north and suffering from terrible hunger, and 700,000 people are starving. And they want also the removal of the Israeli army from all roads and the beginning of exchange of prisoners so that Israeli prisoners would be released and Palestinian prisoners would be released.
And how do you assess the prospects for a successful ceasefire agreement, given the insistence by Hamas on hostage release and IDF troop withdrawal?
I think the chances depend completely on the United States of America. If they sustain a strong pressure on Israel, we will have a deal. And if they don't, they will pay a very high price because they will be perceived as participants in the war crimes that are happening against Palestinians.
Danny Ayalon is Israel's former Deputy Foreign Minister and Ambassador to the United States. I asked him what he thinks about the negotiations in Cairo and the prospects for a deal.
We hope so, certainly. You know, we would like to bring back our babies who are there in captivity for half a year now, and elderly and women, which we know they are in the most horrendous conditions. But it all depends on Hamas. I think that now Israel pretty much agreed on all the sticking points, namely the ratio of Palestinian terrorist prisoners to be released for each hostage, and also moving back of some of the people from Gaza, the Palestinians, from the southern part of Rafah, which is in Rafah, to the northern part. And there's still some issues about the identity of those, and I believe this is what will be the crux. And this will be discussed in Cairo this week.
Now, we understand that the CIA director and the Israeli spy chief are taking part in these talks, along with senior officials from Qatar and Egypt. What kind of pressure could that put on to reach a deal?
Well, there are two kinds of pressures on Hamas. Unfortunately, as a terror organization, they are not really bound by any international rules. I mean, in terms of even very common human ethics and morals. However, there are two kinds of pressures. One is military on the ground, which Israeli force is moving ahead. Secondly, it would be a pressure on their leaders who live in Doha, in Qatar. They live in five-star hotels where their people are languishing in Gaza. So if Qatar would be to expel them, that could be a real threat. And this is what the United States now is asking for the Qataris to put maximum pressure on the leadership of Hamas in order to be, so they would be more, I would say, agreeable in reaching finally terms for the exchange.
So along with that pressure from President Biden on Hamas, President Biden also pushing Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel to fully empower his negotiators to reach a deal. Does President Biden have that kind of leverage to move things along? And how much was the killing of those US aid workers a factor in the latest push?
Yeah, this was very unfortunate. You know, this is what we call friendly fire. Israel took full responsibility, and I guess they also will have to compensate the families, which we will do, of course, very willingly. And yes, there is pressure from President Biden to reach a ceasefire, but not at any price. The Americans know if they put all the pressure on Israel, there will never be a deal, because the Hamas will just wait patiently until Israel is delivered to them.
Moving on to the rest of the day's news now. Peter Pellegrini has been elected as Slovakia's new president. He defeated former diplomat Ivan Korčok with 53% of the vote in Saturday's runoff election. Pellegrini is seen as a populist and is a strong ally of Prime Minister Robert Fico, who has called for an end to Western support for Ukraine and for repairing relations with Russia. Speaking to supporters in Bratislava, Pellegrini said he plans to keep Slovakia on the side of peace, not war. Local elections are underway in Poland, the first test of power for the new coalition government since it took office 4 months ago. Prime Minister Donald Tusk is looking to build on his election success last October, which ended 8 years of rule by the Nationalist Law and Justice Party. Close to 200,000 candidates are standing for municipal councils, provincial assemblies and city mayors. Russia's government has declared a federal emergency in the southwest region of Orenburg due to flooding. The country's emergency minister toured one of the hardest-hit cities on Sunday to supervise rescue operations. Orsk is near the border with Kazakhstan, where a dam burst on Friday. The floods have forced more than 4,000 people to evacuate. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. All smiles as Chinese Premier Li Qiang meets the US Treasury Secretary. We'll look at whether the two see eye to eye on trade policy.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello there, welcome back. The headlines. 6 months of fighting in Gaza. Protests intensify, calling for a ceasefire and hostage deal as the Israeli military says it's withdrawing some troops from the south. More than 33,000 Palestinians have been killed since October the 7th, including nearly 14,000 children. Now, trade and the economy were top of the agenda as Chinese Premier Li Qiang met the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen in Beijing on Sunday. Our correspondent there, B. Ran, has the latest.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen concluded her visit to Guangzhou and continues her trip in Beijing today. This morning, she met with Chinese Premier Li Qiang and to discuss China-US economic ties and other key issues. Premier Li said China-US relations are showing signs of stabilization. Beijing hopes to be partners with the United States. He emphasized the need for mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and mutually beneficial cooperation. Through their joint efforts, Yellen said the U.S.-China relationship has become more stable. As the world's two largest economies, she said both sides should responsibly manage bilateral economic ties. She added that Washington appreciates the progress achieved through U.S.-China economic dialogues and cooperation, and she played down talk of decoupling. This afternoon, Yellen also visited Peking University, one of China's top universities, and held discussions with academics and students. The conversation mainly on economic and trade exchanges as well as financial stabilities. This marks Yellen's second visit to China, and she will remain in China until next Tuesday.
B. Ran in Beijing there. Thousands of doctors in Hungary are moving to Western Europe, leaving hospitals in the country understaffed and burdened by long waiting lists. On World Health Day, this special report comes from our Budapest correspondent, Pablo Gutierrez.
Dr. Sultan Holt is enjoying work once again. He spent 10 years as an anesthesiologist at a Budapest hospital, but he says the long hours, poor conditions, and low pay took a toll on his health. He felt burnt out, so he decided to move to Germany.
Every morning, I wondered if I could save lives. The stress got so bad that I had to take a mix of 4 blood pressure pills just to function.
Dr. Holt is not alone. Over the past decade, about 8,500 doctors and nurses have left Hungary looking for better pay and working conditions. That's left the country's healthcare system understaffed and led to longer waiting times for patients.
Most doctors in this country don't have the luxury of regular hours or weekends off. Many of us work extra shifts to make ends meet, sacrificing our free time. The stress during work hours is tough, and it's pushing a lot of nurses and doctors to leave the country or switch careers altogether.
The government raised salaries by 11% in January. Now the average monthly salary for a general practitioner is $6,200. But doctors still feel overwhelmed by their workload, saying that they have more patients and fewer resources. Right now, Hungary has only 33,000 doctors, serving a population of 9.7 million people, which translates to 3.5 doctors per 1,000 inhabitants, the lowest ratio among EU countries. Dr. István Kormedy is Budapest's oldest general practitioner. At almost 101 years old, he says the shortage of doctors in public health care means many work way past the retirement age.
There's a long wait for medical care, especially for surgeries like hip replacements, which can leave people in a lot of pain and unable to move. Some people turn to private care for quicker treatment, but it's expensive. As more people switch to private care, the wait times there get longer too.
Since leaving Hungary, Dr. Holt hasn't looked back. He says he is facing fewer financial pressures and continuing to do life-saving work.
The working conditions in Germany are much better. I work in a heart hospital specialising in cardiac surgery. Within 3 years there, I became a chief physician.
According to Dr. Holt, the hemorrhage of doctors in Hungary won't stop until the root causes of the healthcare crisis are healed. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Budapest.
Current and former world leaders have gathered for a somber ceremony commemorating the 1994 Rwandan genocide. The country's President Paul Kagame lit a flame of hope in the capital, Kigali. Former US President Bill Clinton was among those attending. More than 800,000 people are thought to have been killed in the country 30 years ago during a period of intense ethnic violence lasting around 100 days. A diplomatic rift has erupted in Central America, where Nicaragua has joined Mexico in suspending ties with Ecuador. It follows a raid on the Mexican embassy in Ecuador's capital, Quito, in which the country's former vice president was detained. Jorge Glass had been holed up in the embassy since December, claiming political asylum. Mexico's president has described the arrest as a violation of international law. China's Qingming Festival is over for another year. Officials say nearly 5.2 million passengers travelled during the three-day holiday. That's almost a 70% rise on last year and includes 500,000 foreign visitors. Qingming, which means Tomb Sweeping Day, is a chance for people to remember and honour their ancestors. Now, parts of North America will experience a total solar eclipse on Monday. Millions of people will experience a brief period of darkness during the day when the Earth, Moon and Sun align. There won't be another total eclipse in the US for 20 years. Our correspondent Poppy Imputing reports from Washington.
Stargazers, eclipse chasers and enthusiasts in North America are in for a treat on Monday. They're eagerly anticipating a solar eclipse. It will cross the continent starting in Mexico before passing over the United States and then Canada. Everyone in all 48 contiguous US states will experience a partial eclipse. A lucky few will see a total eclipse where the moon passes between the Earth and the sun, blocking out sunlight. Those areas include Mexico's Pacific coast, 13 US states from Texas to Maine, and eastern Canada, including Niagara Falls. The longest stretch of darkness will last about 4.5 minutes. During the eclipse, the temperature will drop and the sky will darken. All that will be visible of the sun is the corona, its outer atmosphere, which will appear as a ring of fire. The phenomenon causes nocturnal animals to wake up and insects and birds to quiet. Many places expect the eclipse to draw tourists from around the country, bringing in a lot of business. Experts warn that those viewing the rare celestial event must use special viewing glasses. Looking directly at the sun without protective eyewear can cause retinal damage. An estimated 31.6 million people live in the path of the total eclipse. That's more than double the number for the last one in 2017. Poppy Imputing, CGTN, Washington.
And a final look at the headlines. 6 months of fighting in Gaza. Protests intensify, calling for a ceasefire and hostage deal, as the Israeli military says it's withdrawing some troops from the south. More than 33,000 Palestinians have been killed since October the 7th, including nearly 14,000 children, in an arena of death, destruction and hunger. And China's Premier Li Qiang cautions the United States over turning trade issues into security headaches as Washington's Treasury Secretary visits Beijing. That's the world today. Thank you very much for watching. There's more on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or you can scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. There's more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next is Razor. For now, from all the team in London, goodbye.